What is going on, guys? Carter here with Edge Mindset. Thank you so much for joining me on this fine, beautiful, overcast, cloudy, depressing day. We're going to be taking apart these two AD-10s. Now, these are not the same. This is a custom AD-10 put together by Andrew Demko with a hand ground blade right here in the good old US of A. Now, a lot of people don't realize that Andrew Demko, who was the primary designer of Cold Steel for many, many years, Lynn Thompson swooped him up early in his career and hired him on to Cold Steel. He invented the Triad lock, the Scorpion lock, a few others. Those are the two that I know for sure, but he did a few other locks, and he was the primary knife designer for Cold Steel for many, many years. He left the company some years ago and kind of moved off on his own production knife company called Demko Knives, and that's where he's producing the AD-20. Now, during that whole time, he made custom versions of his knives, the 4-max, 5-max, and of course the AD-10. So he has made customs his whole career. He is a knife maker along with being a former Cold Steel employee. So this is a knife produced by Cold Steel because they own the design in a production knife capacity. I mean, I don't know all the details. I don't think they're obviously not the only ones that can make this knife because Andrew was able to make a production version. He had to do some modifications to it, though, in order to have it made. And that's what we're going to be looking at with this custom here. This is technically an HG AD-10m, which stands for hand ground, AD-10, and then M for modified. And we're going to be looking at the differences between these two knives. Now, you may be like, where's the hardware, bro? I already preemptively disassembled this one. One, because I wanted to be extra careful. I wanted to make sure I didn't get frustrated and slip and scratch it. And also the tolerances are so tight on this that it's hard to get this scale off. I have taken it apart before. So I'm like, I'll just, I knew I needed to preemptively take at least one of these apart. So I'm like, you know what, I'll start with that guy right there. Now, the only bummer on this is the pivots and how they're oriented are reversed. So this one I have to take the show side scale and liner off, whereas on the custom I took not the lock side because it's a back lock, but the non-show side. So it is going to be a little bit reversed as we look at these because I don't need to take the entire thing apart. I just need to get the scales off so that we can take a look at the mechanism and you can see what the differences are. Now, what I don't completely know in terms of differences is what all differences are required for him to legally make the knife, that designates the modified, and then which ones are just changes that he made because he wanted to and he can. There's really only two main changes that I am aware of, other than slight differences, right? Like, obviously there's going to be differences. Don't be alarmed. At this scale, I forgot about that. I've done some experimenting with this thing. I tried to blacken these scales so that it matched the lock there by using Aluma Black, which is chemically changes the color. It kind of oxidizes the aluminum, and it didn't work out that well. So I ended up kind of just reversing it and sanding it off and undoing what I did. But obviously I didn't need to make those changes on the inside here. Let me put this pin back in so that we're looking at it correctly. Now, both of these knives feature what you would call a triad lock, right? This one is modified and this one is the original triad lock. So we'll start with the other difference. So the main difference you're going to see between these two, other than minor, minor things, is this has an aluminum backspacer here, which means they had to put a steel spring insert in here. So that's what gives you the tension when you hit this lock right there. That's what gives you the tension on this spring, and this actually will come out, if you wanted to. On the custom, since the backspacer's titanium, it's actually all one piece. So it's just milled out of one solid piece for that back spring right there. Pretty cool, pretty cool. Now, I don't think this is required for the M designation. I could be wrong. because I think the only issue with making this knife has to do with the Triad lock. I believe, once again, I don't have, this is what I've surmised and what I've heard from people, what I've researched, throwing in a little bit of my own assumptions and logic, right? I believe Cold Steel owns the right to the Triad lock, which has a specific patent. And in order for you to do something similar, legally, your thing has to be X number of items or magnitude different than that patented thing in order for it to exist. I'm not a legal guy. That's just as I understand it. And so I don't think this has to do with that, but it might. You know, the patent might include the whole mechanism and not just the Triad portion. Now, for those that don't know, we'll dive into what is the Triad lock. You know, to put simply, it's this pin right there. A traditional lock back knife does not have that pin. So this is all basically the same. You know, this action right here is basically the same. The only difference is the back of the tang is directly interfacing with the front of the lock here. And so that does not create a very stable locking mechanism, because the energy transferred by pressing down on this is directly transferred into this. By putting this pin in between, now you are running that energy all the way through the frame, because you can see that pin goes into these liners, and on the custom goes right into the titanium slabs. And that's what makes the Triad lock special, and that's what makes the Triad lock so freaking strong. That discovery right there of transferring that energy into the frame. So it basically means you're no longer locking up between a movable surface and a movable surface. You're locking a movable surface to a static surface and a movable surface to a static surface. That is the genius of it. And it's one of those things where you might say, well, why didn't they do this earlier? That's because it takes quite a bit of precision machining to get this dialed in correctly. Getting both of these surfaces to hit on this pin and everything aligned perfectly takes a lot of work. And I know Andrew has said making these custom knives in the past was quite difficult. I assume that it's gotten better with modern machining and more precision machining and things like that. But back in the day when he was doing these kind of by hand, it was a pain, according to him, and very difficult to do. Now, what we're going to look at here is, if we move this forward, you can see that pin is completely round, right? Completely round. Now, the big difference on the custom here, hopefully we can see this, it's flat on that side. That engages on here. And of course, there's some other differences, like it's chamfered, right? Which is better, right? It wraps around that pin. Whereas on this guy here, it's just I believe it's just oh no, it is as well. I take that back. So it is chamfered on that side as well. And you can also see that the pin on the custom's a little bit bigger than what you have in the production. You know, I think that's probably inconsequential in terms of strength, but kind of cool. But the biggest thing is that flat piece. And then I believe that this will also like rotate. I don't really want to mess with that. I don't think it's keyed in there. Don't want to mess with that because I don't want to mess up the lockup. But he has modified the way that lock works there. And you can see both of these has some room to travel. A little bit less on the custom. You know, like these surfaces, they're steel on steel, hardened steel on steel, so it really shouldn't move very much at all. But technically, over time, this could kind of move over, and then, you know, it can only travel that gap's worth of distance, whereas on this production knife, it's got a little bit more room to play. Now, I would argue that the machining on this is more precise, and so you're probably getting more surface contact here than on this guy here. So the idea of that lock moving in, I think, is pretty unlikely, Another thing that I just realized that's kind of interesting is this hole right here. Now, I forget the story of why that hole exists. I've heard a few different things. Some people say it was put in there. Oh, I remember. So the prototype for this knife, here's the story. So the prototype for this knife that Andrew sent to Lynn Thompson to check out included a hole that you could thread a pin in that would interact right here and add an additional locking capability, so that even if the lock were to fail, which, you know, is very unlikely, but let's say there's debris in here and it didn't fully lock, it wouldn't be able to move forward because it would be hitting this manual pin. Lynn decided not to go with it. I don't know if he just didn't like the idea or the expense of manufacturing it would be too much. He decided not to go with it. but Andrew liked the look of the hole, and so he just kind of kept it. And who knows how true exactly that is, but that's the most likely story I've heard. And I just realized that this one does not have that hole, so it has been removed from that scale. So that is the comparison between the production Triad lock and the modified M Triad lock. Let me know what you think down below. I know a lot of people requested this video. They wanted to see what the differences were between this one and this guy. And as you can see, it's not a lot. There may be some secrets that are being hidden in the M that I am just not seeing with my eyes. And like I said, a lot of the times with these patents, you've just got to be, such and such far enough away from the other one in order for it to qualify as something new. All right, guys, I will talk to you later. I am out of here.